Okay, so let's get into it. This is the September opening lab. We got some questions in from Patreon. First one here is from Tim, who says, I was looking through Nakamura's games and saw a very interesting sideline for him. Nakamura to Polov, V-Day Grand Prix, Naka played, let me put this on the board, knight of 3, knight of 6, E3, G6, and B4. And Tim says the full game can be found here on Lichess. I was surprised to see that this position has actually been reached in almost 200 mastery games. Yeah, it's a thing, Tim. It is a thing. Is there a name for this type of setup for white? Is it an anti-Grunfeld or an anti-King's Indian move order? And are there any opening resources that cover typical plans and ideas from either side? All right, Tim. Yeah, this is a kind of a funky sideline. I definitely don't know too much concretely about it, like what it's called and stuff. I've never thought about it. On chess.com it says ready opening quiet system. In terms of whether it's an anti-Grunfeld or an anti-King's Indian, I think in general it's going to be an anti-Grunfeld because at the top level I think GMs, they really don't mind if their opponent is going to play King's Indian. So there's not a lot of anti-King's Indian, mainly because black can play the King's Indian against everything other than E4, right? So there's actually, like, as far as I know, I don't think there is a thing as like an anti-King's Indian. Because what is an anti-opening? An anti-opening is when you play a very specific variation so that your opponent isn't able to execute their favorite opening. So the Grunfeld is a huge target for being antied, because the Grunfeld is very specific, right? The Grunfeld is just... Actually, there's a question later on what white should do against the Grunfeld, so this is kind of relevant to that. So this is the Grunfeld proper that we all know and love. But of course, the Grunfeld is very theoretically sound, and guys like Svidler and MVL are just rock solid here. Vichy used to play this, and Gelfand is just very, very tough to crack. I think this was Gelfand's choice in his match with Vichy, right? And it was just really, really hard to... yeah, it was Gelfand's choice against Vichy. I'm trying to think. I think they both played it. And so because this one is so hard to crack, then what white started doing many years ago is playing knight of 3, knight of 6, and c4. And this, it was kind of like an anti-Grunfeld system, because if black goes g6, knight c3, d5, kind of playing Grunfeld style, then white takes, and here white has a bunch of extra options other than d4. So notably queen a4 check used to be very theoretical, queen b3 is a thing, queen c2 is a thing. Nowadays, h4 is absolutely a move in this position. White can even go e4, and then on knight takes e3, take this way and go for this kind of endgame where I think a lot of, or a few Chinese players have actually shown that this can be quite annoying for black. Or white can go b takes c3, and then again have a few more options, given the fact that they haven't played d4 yet, like h4, h5. One player to follow on all these like anti-Grunfeld sidelines, I would say, is Aronian. I feel like he's played a bunch of different ideas against the Grunfeld, and is usually pretty tricky. There's also g3 here, which, as far as I know, gives white a pleasant position. So, in addition to the whole minefield that black has to know in the actual Grunfeld, they also have to know all of these anti-lines. Another anti-line that I used to play myself quite a bit, and would still play today given the right opportunity, is f3. And again, like, black can play the King's Indian obviously against knight c3, black can play the King's Indian against f3. That's the thing, black can do the King's Indian against everything, white can't really avoid it, might as well play the right setup. But against this line, playing the Grunfeld is definitely very playable, but here it comes with the drawback that after e4, black cannot take on c3. And this is a big thing for the Grunfeld players, because when they take on c3, they're trading off one piece, which kind of eases the space disadvantage. And then they leave white with this pawn on c3 that they can later put pressure on. You know, they go c5, bishop g7. It's like the whole point of the Grunfeld. It's a very powerful opening. Here, white goes e4, and black is forced to keep the knight on the board. White gets to keep more pieces on the board, keeps more of a space advantage. And not that white is better here, but this is just another way that white can try to fight for an edge against the Grunfeld. Okay, and then finally, we have another anti-Grunfeld line that developed in the last couple of years. I think mainly thanks to the efforts of, I want to say, Grischuk. I feel like Grischuk made this one popular a couple of years ago by playing it a bunch. I remember him playing against Nepo. Nepo is also like this huge Grunfeld guy. And I believe Naka has played this himself, if I'm not mistaken. I think Fabi, like I think a lot of the top players now have tried this. And this is again kind of anti-Grunfeld, because if black goes d5, white will take on d5, knight takes d5. And here white will even give up a full tempo just to avoid this trade on c3. Because then black has to go back to b6 or something, and white can start developing. And last time I checked, white has actually some decent chances to fight for an edge here. Which is surprising, because we lost a move with e4, but that's how much it matters not to have traded off this knight, which can go to c3. It can also go to d2, actually, in these positions, especially against, like, some bishop g4 stuff. So this e3 line is another way of playing kind of anti-Grunfeld, because if black castles, white goes bishop e2, black has to make a decision, right? If he goes d6, then he's playing a King's Indian, not exactly what a Grunfeld player wants to do. And if he's playing d5, then again, he has to deal with the cd5 and e4 stuff. So black has some good options here, of course, like the Benoni here is considered pretty decent. I think b6 is fine. I think Magnus played like knight c6 and was fine. So there are some options here, but if black isn't comfortable playing a King's Indian, then they might have some small difficulties. I mean, that's all that we're kind of going for with white, you know, is just posing a few questions to black. That's right. Yeah. So that's why I feel like this b4 stuff is it's basically just a way to get something, you know, playable when black goes for this kind of fianchetto, the setup. I wouldn't necessarily say it's like anti-Grunfeld, because it doesn't exactly make sense here. Like black can definitely still play d5 and bishop g7, and it's really up to black to choose what kind of setup they want to do. So I checked out that Naka Topalov game, and that one went like this. It was bishop g7, bishop b2, castles, c4, and here black played b6. So in this position, usually I think black goes d6 and basically just plays like a King's Indian, where white has his bishop on b2, which honestly in my opinion is like not the most dangerous line against the King's Indian, and I'll explain why. Here on d4, black has a couple moves that they can play. One move that seems to be pretty popular is e5, just in this position already. And if black can just play e5 without issues, and then one day even go like e4 and rook e8, then black just gets like a very nice, we can call it like a reverse King's Indian attack, you know, like h5, and yeah, basically white will have no advantage. So on e5, especially when white is going for these bishop b2 lines, the idea is usually to take, right? I mean, white's whole point is to discourage kind of black's main break in the King's Indian with e5. And here there are some games with knight fd7, and seems like black is doing okay here. It like is gonna probably just take back with the pawn. Maybe go knight c6, rook e8, f5, and just kind of develop actively. So I think this is okay for black, but I also want to mention that I feel like a really solid move is also just c5 here. And I think I saw this idea in Avrick's, one of Avrick's repertoire books on, I think, against d4 sidelines. He covers it there. Actually, to answer later part of your question, Tim, that's the only opening resource I know that covers this line at all, is that one book by Avrick, the d4 sidelines book. There might be others, but I just don't know of them off the top of my head. So this c5 move, as far as I remember, is kind of an equalizer, because white is just really behind in development, and if they go for something like this endgame, you know, whenever they take this pawn, black is always going to be able to win this one back pretty easily, and yeah, then white is going to be left with kind of a weak structure. So yeah, I've always felt like black is totally fine after this move. If you check the theory nowadays, you'll see that everyone who goes for this position at the top level, or most players I should say, instead of the very natural d4, which is usually how the line was kind of meant to be played, will go for bishop e2 in this position. And then when black goes e5, which seems to be quite logical, here some players have just been playing d3. Just looking at the database here, we have people like Svidler, Lenderman, Ivancha, Kuzubov, a bunch of other GMs, some guy named Korchnoi, all playing this from white side. And I actually haven't really seen this position all that much, like just before today. I've never felt like this was particularly dangerous. To me, it just kind of looks like some kind of reverse Sicilian position, aka it's like an English now that we're playing, and I think it's fine. I mean, I imagine this should be fully playable, and a King's Indian player should be happy here, and someone who kind of plays the English with white should also feel kind of comfortable here, or someone who likes, you know, these reverse Sicilian types of positions. So yeah, long story short on this line, I think it's a way to get something kind of unusual against the King's Indian, but it's definitely not anything particularly dangerous. As a King's Indian player, I can tell you I'm rarely unhappy to see this over the board or online. Yeah, actually I would say nowadays another really common way, I would say this e3 b4 is actually rather unusual. I remember much more common line is to go c4 and then b4 like this without e3. And the advantage for white here is that well, you don't have to play e3, the bishop can still go to g3. So this is one way that some players try to do like a double fianchetto with white, like bishop g2, castles, and okay, double fianchetto, you know, you take it from there, maybe d3, knight c3, kind of like that. It's pretty similar to this other line. I would say, again, black can go like d6, e5 and get a pretty reasonable King's Indian. But yeah, if this is like your cup of tea as white, then I would say it's like a very reasonable position to play. What are the drawbacks of 3f3? That's a good question. I would say the main drawback of this move is more of a practical one. Like, you're now committing to play f3 against the Grunfeld, of course. You're committing to f3 against the King's Indian. And black also has like a bunch of lines, like they can go c5 and play Benoni. They can also play c5 and then b5 and like play a Benko. So you have to be ready for like all of these different lines. So it's basically, it's a huge repertoire, essentially. It's d5, it's bishop g7, it's like c5 and e6, and there's some funky move orders here that we have to know about. And then we have c5 and b5, and then these are just like the main options here. Then black has some sidelines. And I played this for a while, so I ran into quite a few sidelines. And I'm not kidding. There's knight c6 here. This is like a very serious move, actually. That's quite tough for white to get an edge against. There's also e6, with the idea not to go c5 but to go d5 of all things, which is kind of shocking that black can play for this kind of thing. But their idea is that on e5 they'll go like knight h5, and they got queen h4 check ideas, and it can actually be kind of annoying for white. And let's see. Oh, of course, there's also e5. This is the old gambit that white has to know. If you don't know anything here as white, you know, you can get caught in some nasty prep. But here I'll just mention that knight h3 is kind of the way to go. And if you just follow the theory here, white is better. There's main idea is to go like bishop g5 next move and force black to trade off the dark squared bishop, and then we go like knight c3. We'll give back this pawn on e5, queen d2, castle, and I think white gets an edge in this structure. But that's still a line that white has to know. And check this out, there's also this move. This is actually a legitimate move that's been played by grandmasters. Just knight h5. just no threat. Knight 8 is one of the oddest moves, and actually I played against it over the board. Grandmaster Mikalevsky did this against me and crushed me. It's such a funky move. I mean, the idea is kind of like to play e5 later on and then threaten to go queen h4, but yeah, it's just a very, very odd move order. I would imagine knight h3 is probably a pretty decent response. I think in the game I was pretty clever. I played bishop g5 and then we had some like kind of crazy mess where he eventually played g5. But it was okay, interesting game. So yeah, I think f3 is really dangerous, and if your opponent is like strictly a Grunfeld player, then you know you can prepare these lines really deep. But it's a lot of sharp theory, and if you don't know what you're doing here, then you can definitely run into some problems. So that's kind of, I would say, the main drawback of this one. Spice Cup is a good tournament, Caden, so if you can play, you should play. You'll get a lot of strong opponents there. Let's see. Well, Tim, yeah, hopefully that answers your questions. All in all, I would say it's kind of a interesting sideline, but white will have better options against the King's Indian, and I think white has better options against the Grunfeld as well. But yeah, let's go on to the next question. Okay, next question comes from Laurent. Would like a recommendation against the Tarrasch Defense. There are a bunch of similar lines, all assessed as plus equals, because of the IQP. Is there anything simple enough, as the Tarrasch isn't very popular? Okay, so then Tim, you guys remember from question 1, actually wrote a response here, which is funny. He kind of answered the question for me, but we'll talk about it a little bit more. He goes, looking forward to hearing what the dojo has to say. I just wanted to note that the current line is considered problematic for black, and probably the reason why the Tarrasch is not more popular. Okay, let's put this one on the board. So d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, c5, takes, knight f3, knight c6, and d takes c5. Yeah, this move was not known for a long time, at least as far as I remember, because I played the Tarrasch when I was like maybe 1900 or so, like all the way up to 2200. Like I think I was still playing it somewhere around there. I switched to the Nimzo because I ultimately just never loved the Tarrasch all that much. But when I was playing it full time, I basically never saw this move. Like it just wasn't a thing. But then they found out that actually after d4, knight a4, as Tim is saying, bishop takes c5, knight takes c5, queen a5 check, bishop d2 takes, and rook c1. That, yeah, this one kind of feels like a very risk-free position for white. Very, very pleasant. So as far as I know, I think this is the reason why people aren't playing the Tarrasch. Not like this exact like line necessarily 100%, but this is like one of the lines where black has some issues. I think Gustafsson has talked about this one quite a bit. He's probably done some videos on it or some analysis. But yeah, white is supposedly better here. We're just going to play e3 soon and open up the position for the dark squared bishop. And yeah, I mean, I think there's some way for black to escape into some endgame, but it's like basically, yeah, white is just kind of playing for 2 results here. But then we also have the other lines against the Tarrasch, like the main lines with g3. And as far as I remember, these lines, like, I think are okay for black, but they're, you know, you have to be able to play them basically, and they're not for everybody. Because playing with this IQP, you know, is tough. Like, the pawn is always going to be weak, and you have to generate enough counterplay to compensate for it, and that's not a task that everyone really loves doing. A lot of players, you know, they just want to play with a solid structure. They can just maneuver their pieces around without constantly having to worry, like, oh, is my pawn hanging? Is my pawn hanging? Like, how am I gonna defend the pawn next time? So yeah, g3 here is actually quite a nice move. You know, they didn't used to know about this one, but this is a discovery I think they made. Oh man, I think Rubinstein was the guy that figured this one out, if I'm not wrong. He was the guy that's like, oh, bishop on g2 is probably going to be pretty good. And yeah, I mean, I would say in this type of position, you know, white has some options. This is usually the main line, and here we can try either d takes c5 or bishop g5. I would say bishop g5 is kind of probably the sharper move, maybe the more ambitious one. I used to play c4 in this position as black, and then there was knight e5 and theory from here. I haven't checked this line in many years, so I couldn't tell you the current standing, but I don't know, maybe actually modern engines might have some ideas here. It always felt suspicious to me, to be honest, from black's point of view. I always felt like I was getting away with something playing this as black. But yeah, bishop g5 can be explored, and if you want something simple, then you can look at d takes c5. But honestly, I mean, I feel like most d4 players are probably just going to be comfortable with the line 6 d takes c5. Once I saw that this was a thing, and all you need to know is basically this one variation, like, there's not much else that black can try after d takes c5. If they take this one, then this pawn is just hanging. So if this is the only line that you need to know, and you just get this kind of like risk-free pleasant position, it just kind of solves the whole thing as white. It's like suspicious, exactly. Like, I think that's kind of why it doesn't seem so popular for black. So yeah, hopefully that helps, Laurent. You can definitely investigate the g3 lines if you want something a little bit more classical, but this dc line is although I think you were kind of asking about it, you're wondering about it from oh no, you were looking for a recommendation against the Tarrasch. That's right. So yeah, I would say DC is probably the easiest way. Especially because this is an opening that's like not that common. So in my opinion, like, already, you know, we don't want to be studying or spending too much time on the opening if we don't have to. And yeah, I think we should kind of like spend an appropriate amount of time based on how likely we are to get the line. So as a d4 player, I would rather focus on like the QGD, the Slav, the King's Indian, Grunfeld, you know, Nimzo, like so many, like the huge openings out there before I would look at the Tarrasch, and so it's nice to just have like a simple option. All right, very cool. Let's go to the next question. And next question is from John. Shout out to John, longtime supporter, who says, hi. In the Taimanov against English attack setups, when white plays f2, f3, black often responds with knight e5. For instance, the GM repertoire book, recent one by Quality Chess by Pavlidis, takes this approach in most instances. For instance, e4, c5. Okay, let's put this on the board. I think this question is from Black's point of view. Knight f3, e6, d4, takes, knight c6, knight c3, queen c7, bishop e3, a6, queen d2, knight f6, f3, knight e5, or castles, bishop b4, f3, knight e5. Okay, so John's asking, what is the idea behind that move? Is it just that white would have to waste time now trying to kick the knight with f3, f4? Is it favorable for black to prevent white from exchanging on c6? Yeah, so actually a couple of ideas behind this move with knight e5. You know, the idea is not necessarily to go knight c4, because when white plays like knight b3 in this position, which I think is still the main line, black doesn't just play knight c4 here, right? Otherwise, if that was the idea, black, that would just be the move. I think black is usually playing either b5 here or castles. So yeah, it's, I don't know actually if there's like one specific idea. I would say the first thought is actually that black wants to take on c3. And this knight b3 move is very important. So let's try to break down why. If white just goes like king b1 here, then black will probably just take on c3. Take, and then black goes d5. We gave up the dark squared bishop, but we weakened white's structure quite a bit. You get this kind of weird French-like endgame. But in my experience, black is usually okay here. Oh no, my alert box is behind everything. There we go. So here I think black is okay. But let's say white played knight b3. Now if black goes for this endgame and plays d5, white has an extra option here, bishop d4, that they didn't have in the previous endgame. And this one's kind of a problem for black because there's a lot of stuff hanging. So like knight d7, for example, like black can think about e5, can also think about just e takes d5, and leaving white with, or leaving black with a tough choice. So knight takes d5, g7 is hanging, and e takes d5 allows rook e1 check, and very unpleasant. And then one day white will just go c4 and like trade off the pawn, and I mean just have like huge advantage with this dark squared bishop. So basically this endgame just doesn't work for black. It just doesn't work. And if knight c6, then we're just taking here. And taking this one. So I guess the main idea is to threaten this move. And then, okay, if white goes knight d2, well then, yeah, then we want knight c4 because we really do want to take this bishop. If we can get knight c4 and take the dark squared bishop, absolutely. Don't even think about it. Just do it. But if we give up the knight for the light squared bishop, I feel like black often not too happy here, ends up losing a lot of time. If I remember correctly, it's like bishop d4, and then there's queen g5 in these positions. I remember a Mitch game where he played queen g5 at some point and won, so I'm just going to assume that that's the idea here. But yeah, basically I think black doesn't really try this one too often. Yeah. H5 is a move, Caden. For example, well, I think H5 is usually played in these bishop E7 lines. So here, black, of course, doesn't have to go bishop B4. We also have options to play bishop E7, F3, And then black can even play h5 here, or like b5, king b1, and then h5 is definitely a move. And actually h5 I think is kind of an interesting approach in these positions, because you basically stop white from being able to play g4. It's a very risky move because now, like, we're not going to be able to castle safely ever, pretty much. We're just going to probably have to play with the king in the center. But if you're looking for like some kind of dynamic mess where you're trying to confuse your opponent, then I would say h5 is actually a pretty reasonable move. In fact, guys, let me give some advice for the adult players in the room. So I apologize to the kids out there, but let's say you're an adult player and you're playing one of these kids who like knows the English attack, and they're like, you know, really good attackers, and they're just playing g4, h4, h5 every game and like crushing their opponents. If you want to have a fighting chance, I think something like this would actually throw them off, right? If you don't let white play their kind of typical plan on the position, a lot of players are just going to get confused and just start honestly doing very strange things. Maybe they'll play f4 too early and allow you to go knight g4, or play like b5, b4, or even bishop b4 might be like a good move here, like putting pressure. So this can be an interesting way to kind of throw your opponent off balance, and at least not make their plan kind of simple and obvious. Not that this is necessarily the best way to play. I'm a Taimanov player myself. I would just go for the main lines here with b5, bishop b7. I think black is okay there, but just as an idea, I'm just gonna throw that out there. So yeah, knight e5. Main idea threat in this move. Look for options to play knight c4. F4, I think someone mentioned in the chat, knight takes e4 is going to be good for black. So yeah, it's very hard for white to play f4 here without preparation. And so this forces white to do something about this threat. Like knight b3 is not necessarily a move white wants to make, right? Like this knight is kind of less active on b3. And then from here, I think black usually continues like b5, bishop b7, castles, rook c8, and etc. One day the knight might well go to c4. I would say this is probably the most likely thing, but for the moment it kind of just chills. Okay, John, hopefully that helps. Basically, it's all about understanding this endgame. Another line that I've played that I think is pretty tricky is this move knight e7. I think black can try this one as well. The idea behind this move is to kind of support this d5 break, as well as trying to play for this endgame. So again, if white goes like king b1 here, black will just take and go for this endgame, and then push d5. And here black is good. Actually, this is a tricky line because again, if white doesn't really understand what they're doing here, this is where you can kind of force them into a bad position. For instance, if they just play this move knight b3, because this is the move in the other line, right? So they play this one. Then again, black can go for this endgame and play d5. And the other endgame was good for white. This one, not so much, right? Because bishop d4 doesn't come with any threat. We're just taking on e4. So here black is able to get a pretty decent kind of French endgame, I would say. I would say it's close to equal. Hey, Awkward Crunch, how's it going? So this is a funny move because it actually, like, again, if white doesn't really understand what they're playing for, then they might just play some random move like knight b3, king b1. I would say both of these moves are not the best white can do, and then black can just take on c3 and get a good endgame. Best move for white, for anyone wondering, knight d2. Because now, of course, there's no knight c4, so it makes sense for white to just defend this guy and not allow this endgame. Doing well, doing well. Yeah, h5 is definitely a very common move in Richter Rouser. Nowadays, it's showing up everywhere. Dragon, Najdorf. It's like, I mean, now, okay, they're just playing h5 like for literally no reason. I assume some of you guys have seen like the latest the latest trend on Chessable is to just go h5 in this position. Which actually has some point, amazingly enough. There is actually some point to this. Because just bear with me for a sec. If black plays g6 here, g6 is not that great because white can take on c6 and then push e5. So this is the problem for black, why they can't go g6 in that exact position. And if you notice here, the knight just doesn't have any good moves. But with h5, white can take. And then after e5, black has this additional option, knight g4. So that's kind of the point. That's why they go h5 instead of g6, which I think is just actually very creative. Very, very clever. Yeah, black does have this knight d5 line, but I think it's supposed to be kind of suspicious. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Because otherwise, everyone would play this move order. This would just solve all of the problems of the accelerated dragon. Right, so... Okay, it's slightly off topic, but I think it's an interesting discussion for the Sicilian. Like, in the accelerated dragon, when we go g6, this allows Marazzi bind. Right, so, and this one is considered, okay, very playable, but, you know, this is a serious problem for accelerated dragon players. So if you go knight f6 first, and then knight c3, and then g6, well, like, you can't just get all of this for free, right? Like, if white plays for the Yugoslav attack, then of course black is getting their d5 break, right? And black is doing better because they're a full tempo up. But white has this extra option of knight c6, so this is kind of the drawback. Otherwise, everyone would just play this move order because then you would avoid the Marazzi bind and get to play an accelerated dragon, but that's not possible. Yeah, but the knight g4 line isn't that great, Caden. It's just kind of tricky, but it's not like considered like amazing. Like, I think it's just like a theoretical line. Like, white has chances for an advantage, black tries to equalize. So it's just kind of like a playable position. Let's just call it one of the main battlegrounds of the Marazzi bind. I think white's best is just to take and go back queen d1. And then there are some options. Takes a genius doing that. No, I don't know. It's just you play queen d1, then bishop d3, whoops, queen d2, castle, bring your rook in, f4. Yeah, knight e6 here, and bishop d3, as far as I remember, is the move. Queen d2, castles. Maybe someone regards it as good for black, but no, it's not. It's not regarded as good for black. I'm sure some players like it, but like, it's definitely playable, but it's not like, you know, it's kind of like a normal white tries for an edge, black tries to fight back. But I would say it's it's definitely not the most solid Sicilian. Okay. Yeah, that's black's idea, Jackson chess. Usually castles like b6, bishop b7, f5. I mean, it's a pretty funky line. Like, it is playable. Like, you could totally make it work as black. And yeah, now there's also e5 in the position as well that black has. But this one, you know, you have to be willing to play this structure with the knight on d5. and this is not for everyone, right? This is kind of this is more like Sveshnikov territory. And if you wanted to play Sveshnikov, you could just play a Sveshnikov. Why are you playing the Accelerated Dragon? You know, Sveshnikov's doing really well nowadays. So. All right, let's go to our final question. Comes from Ian Lamb, who I think, shout out to Ian, has asked a question in like every opening lab for like 2 years. so Ian has gained a ton from this show. On the early h5, what is usual? Bishop g5? I don't know what's usual. I think the line is getting still very much explored. But let's just put that position on the board. As far as I understand, white has different options, and black has to be willing to play a dragon, to play a classical Sicilian. Like with bishop g5, there's some kind of I guess there's some kind of transposition to the rouser at some point. I'm not really sure what's going on, but yeah, I bet there would be some serious nuances here. But yeah, I couldn't tell you if it was just what's the current main line. To me, h3 makes sense as a move, but maybe there's some point after h3, g6. Black can argue that this is kind of a more useful inclusion. Not really sure. I bet there is something. Maybe even they might even play d6 here. But yeah, they have some devious ideas. Hey, Dan Cruz. Yeah, this will be posted on YouTube. Yeah. Wait, HAD? What does that stand for? I don't follow. I remember that was just that was hilarious. Hyper Accelerated Dragon. Oh, I see. Yeah, we just talked about it for a few minutes, because it came up kind of randomly, but maybe it will be interesting for you. You can also catch the VOD as soon as this show is over. Hey, Hans got his final GM norm. Wow, nice job, Hans. He's not here, but nice job. Oh man, that kid is very talented. Very, very talented player. So that was clearly just a matter of time for him to get his norm. But yeah, I saw he was playing in Charlotte in the GM norm event there. Yeah, will be fun to see GM Hans. Okay, so let's go to Ian's question. Ian is asking probably hard one, this. We'll see. What's the best way to meet the Grunfeld, starting with 1d4 in ChessDojo's view currently? Okay, yeah, tough question. Let's put it on the board. d4. Oops. Okay, so it's good that Ian specified, because yeah, I would say if you know your opponent is playing the Grunfeld and you're a d4 player, then you can consider doing things like knight f3, knight f6, one of these anti-lines that we talked about. So Ian, if you're watching the VOD and you just skipped to this part because you didn't care about anyone else's question, no, I think you usually watch the show, so you're not going to do that. But go back, because we talked a lot about these anti-Grunfeld lines that might be interesting to you as well. I would say if you know your opponent is playing the Grunfeld, then you can look at one of these lines, because these can be pretty dangerous, like with d5, takes. I remember which line was really dangerous lately. It was I think it was this like queen b3 line was causing black a lot of issues. There was like knight b6, white goes like d4, bishop g7, and like h4, something like this. I don't remember exactly, but there are all these h4 lines nowadays that really can be bothersome for black. Or maybe there's some like knight g5. Some knight g5 line. I remember there was some early like e4, bishop b5 check, knight g5 line. I don't know if anyone knows what I'm talking about, but anyway, there's some tricky lines here that white can try. And so I would say that this is very much worth exploring. Even the lines with like e4 takes and dc3, like you could play this endgame for an advantage. You could try to like get some small edge against Grunfeld players here. Playing like a quick h4, h5 and just trying to put pressure on them in this endgame. I think trying to follow bishop f4, putting pressure on this one. King can like live very comfortably on c2, and like white can like even grind a little bit of an edge here. Okay, but if we're starting with d4, that definitely limits our options. But this is part of my repertoire nowadays because I'm a d4 player, so I definitely have to deal with the Grunfeld. There are definitely a lot of options here that white can try. I would say in general, like with most things, but really with the Grunfeld, it's gonna be all about how you actually like play the position. So, you know, there's a bunch of different lines where you can just get like a big center like this. And I mean, you know, you could argue that you're better here. You can just forget what the engine says and everything. You could just have a big pawn structure. I mean, that's always been kind of the weird thing for me about the Grunfeld, is that although it's a very good opening theoretically, it's like very theoretically sound and solid, white should be happy with the positions that they're getting. I mean, you know, this is like a d4 player's dream, right? The whole point of playing d4 is to play e4. And in this line, like, you know, white gets to do it, right? The whole point of playing c4 here is so that on dc, that one day we can go e4, take back the pawn, and like have a nice center. So this is the whole point. This is what white is playing for. And in the Grunfeld, black just gives it to you. They're like, you know what? I will give you my d pawn for your c pawn. Go ahead. And not only that, I'll even replace your c pawn for you, so you don't lose anything in the center. We basically got to trade a b pawn for a d pawn. And this is why actually the Grunfeld like wasn't really taken seriously for some time, because players just felt like, well, this doesn't make any sense. Like, black has just given up the center, so how could this be good? But it is playable. But despite the fact that it's very playable and it's a theoretically, again, very, very sound opening, like black is totally fine here at top levels. Despite that, I mean, as a d4 player, you can still be quite happy here with the position that you're getting. So I think that's kind of important to understand. Yes, Piyush, there's a lot of lines, but there definitely is a line with bishop f4. I mean, you know, the thing is, like, the Grunfeld is so solid, like, white has probably tried like literally 20 different systems across like d4, knight f3, like against the Grunfelds, like 20 different things you can do. At least, maybe more. Okay, so what I would actually suggest here is the line with knight f3 and bishop e3. This is the one that I've been playing for a little while now. Actually, usually black will go c5 here, and then we'll play bishop e3. So I've played this one quite a bit recently. Rook b1 is a really sharp option. I would say this is a good one to play if you're not playing like a super theoretical guy. So, you know, we're going to have to do a lot of hedging here, okay? But if you're playing a Grunfeld player who just kind of plays by feel and doesn't really know a lot of theory, then like, and you want to like prep and crush him, then like rook b1, that's the line. You know, you prep this deeply, you'll get a big advantage and you'll kill him. But if your opponent is like a kind of a reasonably prepared player, even if they're like 1800, 2100, but they kind of know what they're doing, then I don't know, rook b1, it's not going to be like I feel like at my level, Grunfeld players they just know this stuff really well. It's very, very hard to get anything. They just know the theory, they equalize, and then that's it. Because the theory here, it runs pretty deep. Bishop e3, I found this one to be more playable. Like, you give black a position where they can actually make some mistakes, and they can't just rely on like their memory. So this would be my main recommendation for folks out there that like they just want to know, like, okay, what do I play here? But I should also note that the bishop c4 lines are pretty comfortable for white as well. Not that you're going to get a big advantage here, just that they're comfortable. Bishop e3, castles, queen d2, rook ab1, rook c1, rook d1, f3 somewhere, king h1. You get the center, you know, you like having the center. I assume you like having the center, you know, you're a d4 player. So these types of positions should be kind of your bread and butter, even if the computer doesn't give you an advantage. Okay, but the reason I kind of like this one is I definitely like this setup, which is like bishop e2, castles. And a lot of games go like this. Castles, bishop e2, let's say takes, knight c6, castles. And I just like the center. It's kind of simple, but I want to go rook c1 and then d5. And I guess main thing to understand is that if black goes like bishop g4 here, white can play d5 and give this exchange on a1. Because after queen takes a1, we're hitting the knight on c6, and then we're going to just win back the exchange. Sometimes you can just play this as like an exchange sacrifice because you get a strong dark square bishop. Here we're just winning the exchange back right away. So let's say, I don't know, bishop f3, knight a5, bishop h6, f6, take, and then like queen d4. I think white has a clear advantage in this position. We got like e5 here, rook e1, and basically we're better. King is weak. We have a nice space. Knight on a5 is on the side. Bishop on f3 can be good here with bishop g4. And yeah, I think this is just a better position for white. Question from Seth. Why is Grunfeld considered good, but the Marshall defense is laughed at by good players? Wait, Seth, what are we talking about? The Marshall... We're talking about the Ruy Lopez Marshall? Like the Marshall Gambit? Or is that... We're talking about a different one? Because he had... I think he had a couple lines named after him. Yeah, bishop d2 is okay. I wouldn't say it kills black's counterplay. I would say bishop d2 against the Grunfeld. We'll come back to this bishop e3 line, but I think that's definitely an oversimplification of this position. If this killed black counterplay, everyone would be playing bishop d2. Bishop d2 would be the main line. You know, there would be headlines across the chess world. Grunfeld problem solved. Bishop d2 kills all counterplay. I think what they're trying to say is that, like, okay, on knight c3, you know, white gets to one day exchange off these bishops, but yeah, it's pretty solid for black. Honestly, white doesn't get much here if black knows what they're doing. Oh, the Marshall is that early d5 stuff. Right, so c4, d5. So this is the Marshall defense. Gotcha. I didn't know that, actually. That makes sense. Frank Marshall was kind of a madman. Yeah, the reason this one is not as good is because on cd5, knight d5, this is actually similar to what we were talking about with the anti-Grunfeld lines before. Here, white doesn't allow black to take on c3. And since black isn't able to do that, white is able to keep more pieces on the board, and black struggles with this knight on b6 as it's just not going to be a great piece. It's kind of passive. Whereas white gets this like beautiful knight coming to c3. So these types of positions are so favorable for white that, like I mentioned earlier, in these positions, white is even willing to give up a full tempo to get this. Like, white is willing to play e3 so that on d5 we can take, and then go e4. So white is willing to give a full tempo just to get a position where we can play e4 and black isn't able to take on c3. So that's the big difference. Is that in the Grunfeld, white is already committed with knight to c3 before black plays d5, because it's very important for black to trade off one pair of knights and then be able to put pressure on the center. Otherwise, white would have a pawn on b2, knight on c3, and just be kind of too secure. So yeah, I think I'll probably actually maybe do like a full video on this one, because I do really enjoy playing these positions with bishop e3. Yeah, casual player, you're right. When white plays e3, black can switch to the King's Indian and get a comfortable position. But think about who we're talking about here. how many Grunfeld players do you know can just switch to the King's Indian? Right? Not so easy. I mean, some can. Some players, they just play both, but a lot of players, they kind of just play one or the other. Like, I'm more of a King's Indian guy. I've, like, never played the Grunfeld with black. I have played it once, actually, I think, over the board, just for fun. And it was actually good. I wish I did it more. But normally, most players will kind of switch, because they're very different openings, actually. Like, King's Indian, you're taking a lot of risk, and you're just trying to get this, like, crazy attacking position. Grunfeld, actually, I would say, I mean, it's pretty dynamic, but it's kind of more positional. Like, you're playing in the center, you're playing on the queen side. We're not just trying to attack the king in the Grunfeld, you know. That actually only happens in very specific lines. Usually we're trying to get queenside counterplay. So, yeah, actually, before I forget, one player to check out for all these bishop e3 lines, actually a couple players, I would say. Number one is Kramnik. Kramnik played this system for many years and scored a lot of nice wins, especially a few against Peter Svidler that are worth studying. I know Ian likes model games, so definitely check out the games of Kramnik here. But perhaps even more importantly, check out the games of Magnus. Magnus started playing this one like 2 years ago, I think in like the Norway Super Tournament and some of the other tournaments. And like he beat Grischuk, he beat Mamanjarov, I feel like he beat MVL. He beat all of these like big Grunfeld guys with bishop e3. I think using like just some new like Alpha Zero stuff. Like he played a lot of h4, h5 plans. I think his move order was a little bit different. If I remember correctly, I think Magnus started with bishop e3 and then went rook to c1. There's some nuances in the move order. I don't feel like we should get into them now, but ultimately it kind of leads to very, very similar positions. You can play knight f3 in this position as well. I'll go over a little bit what black's options are. So they can castle here. I think the main line is to go queen a5, where white should go queen to d2. And if black wants to, they can go for this kind of endgame, where we can decide actually how we recapture. I think all three moves here are possible. I believe Magnus took with one of the pieces. I think he took with either the bishop or the knight here. But you can also take with the king. And this endgame, I would say, is very, very playable. Like, one interesting idea is to go like bishop b5 in this position, for example, which is kind of a funny move. But the point is that if knight c6, we'll take and we'll play against the structure. If a6 and b5, then bishop kind of comes back here and is well placed in this position. And if black goes like bishop d7 or something, then when we take, black's knight doesn't get to go out to the most active c6 square. So white can definitely try to play for like a small but kind of nagging edge. So these Grunfeld endgames, I would say, are really tricky and worth studying. I feel like I would have to do just like a whole video on it to to break down the different ideas. But I don't know, I think like the engine will always hold it for black, but over the board it's not often comfortable. And one of the main pieces of advice I'll give to people, if you're ever struggling against the opening, like, oh, I just don't know what to do against Grunfeld, or I don't know what to do against King's Indian, or I don't know what to do against Benoni, or I don't know what to, just fill in the blank. I don't know what to do against X and X. Just take up the opening yourself, play it from the other side, and you'll see what the problems are, right? Like, if you're really struggling with the Grunfeld, start playing it for black. And just see how many different things white can throw at you, see how many different lines have like weird nuances that you don't know about. It's like, it's rarely easier for the other side, and if it is easier, if the Grunfeld just turns out to be a perfect opening, well, congratulations, you just found yourself an opening for life, right? So it's kind of like a win-win. I did this a couple years ago with the King's Indian. I think this is something I mentioned before, but the reason I picked up the King's Indian in the first place was because I was a d4 player struggling against the King's Indian. I would just like get these weird positions. I didn't know what I was doing. I would win some games, I would lose some games, and then I decided one day, I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna play it. I'm just gonna play it, and either I'll learn exactly how to crush it, because, you know, I'll just be suffering in every game and people will show me exactly how to kill the King's Indian, or it'll just be a good opening for me, and that's kind of what what it turned out. But by playing the opening, I definitely got a ton of new ideas as to how to play against it, because being a King's Indian player, I now know exactly like what kind of positions like I don't like, what kind of positions I don't want to get into, and as white I can like directly aim for those exact positions. There are various sub-variations in a line. How do you do that? Piyush, are you asking about the analysis board? On chess.com, if you just make a bunch of different variations, it'll input those automatically. Okay, so these endgames are worth studying very much. Yeah, I think, I mean, objectively, it should all be equal for black, but, you know, it's never easy. So that's kind of the moral of the story. And black can play other ways here as well. They can castle, for example. I think white goes rook c1 here, or rook b1, and then like rook d8. This is a move, or I should say this is the line, like d5, e6. Point of rook c1, of course, is to defend this pawn so that we can push d5 and take this space. Then on e6, I think bishop g5 here is the move, and yeah, there's some theory here, like with f6 and bishop f4, bishop e3, and so on. We won't get into it here, but there is some sharp theory here. But if you prepare it, you can definitely pose some problems for black. It's not the easiest position in the world. Oh, the question is, how do we study sub variations? Oh, I see. Well, yeah, again, this is a question that could, well, that does deserve a full series of videos, you know, which I think we will do at some point. And I've done some videos on this in the past on our YouTube channel, maybe my old YouTube channel, I'm not sure. But basically, Piyush, I would say I mean, it really depends on your level, first off. Like, the higher rated you go, I think the more specific knowledge you need. Conversely, the lower rated you go, the less of, like, you know, theory you need, and the more you just need of an idea of like what you're doing. So my suggestion would be to find lines where you just like the plan. Don't worry about like what the engine says. Don't worry about anything actually, except just how you feel about the position. Like, do you like the line? Do you like attacking in this way, or do you like the plan that the line is kind of going for? So there's no such thing as a best opening, right? There's no like secret opening guide that's like, here's the best stuff, here's the lines that you should. It's just about what works for you. Some openings are going to work better for players, and some openings are going to work better for other players, right? So it's like, it's just about finding the positions that you personally enjoy and feel, right? You have to feel the middle of the game. Like, you understand what you're doing, when to make a pawn break, when to castle, how to get counterplay. Now, if you're learning a new opening, you're not going to know all this stuff off the bat, but you might have a sense of like, oh, I kind of like this position. You know, a lot of players, they really like the King's Indian, for example, right? Or they really like the Grunfeld. And then they end up playing it for quite some time. Or from white's point of view, you find some system that you kind of enjoy. It has some point to it, you know, some devious ideas, and you just play it, you know, and you try to learn it a little bit deeper, pick up on nuances, study games, study the games of top players, and you try to understand the line a little bit better. Okay, so I think the question was specifically about how to actually study the variations, and my opinion would be, find some players that you want to follow. Find someone to look at some of their games, basically. And I think that would be my main thing. Like, the way I would do it is I would check out the latest top games, find some game that speaks to you, that's like, oh wow. Like, if you have issues against any opening, for example, King's Indian, just look up what Magnus did against the King's Indian the last time someone played it against him, or look up you know, Aronian, Kramnik, Giri, Caruana, any of these players, what they did against the King's Indian, and see how you like it. You know, let the top players kind of show you the blueprint. Well, actually, you know, I'm a d4 player against the King's Indian. I recently did a video on this, deep video on our YouTube channel about the h3 line, which I think is also a very decent option for white against the King's Indian, among others. H3 and bishop e3. And the thing that turned me on to this line was this game by Caruana versus Nakamura, where Caruana played the system against Naka, who's like a big King's Indian guy, got like a winning position right out of the opening, pretty much, had like a very, very strong attack, ended up messing it up and losing the game, but he kind of showed like, oh wow, this is actually a super dangerous system. And then I started looking into it, I started exploring it, and I was like, oh wow, this is like really interesting for white, and I enjoyed it. And yeah, if you want to learn more, actually, I would suggest checking out our YouTube channel. You'll find my video on it there. So yeah, it's all about just finding some idea that is interesting to you and then trying to make it work, trying to explore it, trying to analyze a bit, looking at games by strong players in the line, just trying to pick up some ideas, you know, what you're playing for. So yeah, hope that helps. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, that is it for the opening lab. I think I'm gonna wrap up the stream here and go get some breakfast. But I hope you guys found it interesting. I certainly did. I feel like I learned a lot just from all the things I said. I thought that was some really instructive commentary. I'll definitely be rewatching the show later and taking notes. So hopefully it was instructive for you guys too.